He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow, and this is the Alex Marlow Show.
All right, you guys know my favorite way to do the shows is to do the filtration, the curation for you. What's the biggest news? Try to give them to you in my voice, my tone. But today I felt like there was a plethora of Middle East news and a plethora of economic news that I did want to call in my colleagues at Breitbart News, who I think are the best in the business at synthesizing and distilling this stuff down. So I've got two back-to-back interviews for you. Joel Pollak on the Middle East, who is our senior editor at large, and then John Carney, our economic and finance editor. Both should be familiar to you if you consume any of my content. And these guys are really terrific, and we cover a ton of ground, and I think you'll really enjoy these. So let's get into the first one with Joel. All right, let's talk about gold for a second. You guys have seen what's happening this year. It's up over 25%. It broke past 3,300. It's at 3,250 right now. And I think it's going to go up from here. You guys are seeing the stock market so chaotic, losing trillions, bouncing around wildly. The one thing that's been so dependent each and every day has been gold. New tariffs are going to continue to shake up trade. Inflation's running hot. Our national debt now over $36 trillion. And the big, beautiful bill, I got to say, it's probably going to add to it, unfortunately. I hope not, but Goldman says that gold could hit 3,700 before the year's out. Central banks are buying gold at record levels, and my friends at Priority Gold have a free gold guide for all of you. They'll help you purchase gold yourself. You'll learn a lot about it. They will teach you all about the industry. I think it's really cool to learn about, to fill yourself in on what your options are. You can move into a gold or precious metals IRA or 401k, tax and penalty free. It's just terrific, and I think that it was the biggest no-brainer. If you'd bought gold when I started recommending it, you'd have made a ton of money by now. Here's what you do. Text SNC, as in Salem News Channel. Text SNC to 24999. That's the whole number. You don't need 10 digits. 24999. Text SNC. Get your 2025 gold guide right now, or you can go to prioritygold.com/freedom. It's another option for you. These are great people with a great product or several great products. Check it out. SNC to 24999, prioritygold.com/freedom. All right, Joel Pollak's with me. Almost all the interesting stuff right now in the news is on Joel's beat. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today. Joel is our senior editor at large at Breitbart News and author of many essential reads. The latest thing he's worked on is Trump 2.0, the most dramatic first 100 days in presidential history. And his recent book, The Agenda, is a pretty thorough drill down on what needs to be done in the early days of the Trump administration to get the agenda on the right foot. Joel, I want to talk Middle East with you. First of all, give me your 30,000 foot on what Trump's up to over there. And I got a lot of specifics. I want to go country by country, what his main goals are. But what's your take, observing what he's doing in the region?
My first take was this trip is not successful. But then I had a chance to think about it and put it in context, and things changed along the way. So I'll tell you why I thought it was not successful at first. On the first day of the trip, even though the president and Stephen Witkoff, his special envoy, were able to celebrate the release of the last living American hostage from Gaza, President Trump went to Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis, contrary to what many people expected, did not join the Abraham Accords. Then the Iranians came out and said they would accept a nuclear deal that included a temporary suspension of nuclear enrichment, which is basically the Obama deal. So the Iranians were saying, yeah, we'll go along with an Obama-type deal, the same deal we got 10 years ago and that Trump left 7 years ago. It wasn't clear that the United States had offered that deal, but the fact that the Iranians would say that in public suggests that maybe they thought it was on the table. Then the Houthis in Yemen fired 2 missiles yesterday, being Tuesday, one on Wednesday, at Israel, despite there being a separate ceasefire between the United States and the Houthis. And then the president said he was going to meet the former jihadi president of Syria while Christians are being massacred in that country, and he was going to drop sanctions. So I thought, this is not a great start. This is actually a pretty weak start. And then you add the story about the plane, which I don't really care about, but it seemed to be the only thing that was appearing in the U.S. media about this trip.
I'm going to get your take on the plane, so you can hold that thought, but we're going to come back to that.
Yeah, watch out for snakes on a plane is my advice. But
it was always an allegory. It was always an analogy.
Right.
On a plane.
But first of all, I took a step back and I looked at what happened in 2017. So in May 2017, almost exactly 8 years ago, the president in his first administration traveled to Saudi Arabia, and then he went to Israel. It was the first time anyone had ever flown directly, at least publicly, from Riyadh to Tel Aviv. And that was the only achievement of the trip. I don't know if you remember the photo, but Trump stood there with the king, I believe, of Saudi Arabia and somebody else, and they had their hands on some kind of giant globe, the orb of whatever it was, and it launched 1,000
the blue
memes.
Orb. It was so cool. Great photos.
Nobody knew what that was. And that was all that really came out of it. And yet, 7 months later, Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and launched the process of the Abraham Accords. He then withdrew from the Iran deal and started recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and Israel started developing all these commercial ties to other Arab nations, and all this incredible stuff started happening. So if you look at what happened in his first term, this initial outreach to the Arab world didn't really produce much until it did. And I think now, looking at Trump's trip today, he's following the same strategy, but in an even more organized and deliberate way. This trip is focused only on the Arab world, even though obviously the Israelis and the Iranians, neither of whom are Arab nations, even if they have some ties to the Arab world, they're out of this trip. They're not directly involved. And many Israelis are concerned that Trump isn't making a stop in Israel, at least not a planned stop. But he's focused on the Arab world, and that actually looks like the right bet in this situation, because Trump doesn't have to sell anything to the Israelis. The Israelis will come on board to any plan he introduces, almost any plan. If it's a bad Iran deal, as I've written, Israel would then exercise its right, its sovereign right to defend itself, and it would attack Iran's nuclear facilities. But basically, Israel doesn't have to be sold on the idea of peace. The Arab world does, but you can't reach out to the Arab world if it's also weighed against this outreach to Israel. And you have to speak to each side in somewhat different terms, even though Trump is very good at telling the same thing to both sides. So I think the trip was well conceived in that way. Then he went to Saudi Arabia. He was incredibly well received. He signed this massive arms deal with the Saudis. He got a $1 trillion investment commitment from the Saudis as well. And he is winning people over. He's influencing people. He's showing that America is open for business. And he's showing that the United States cares about the concerns of the Arab world. He got a huge round of applause in Saudi Arabia when he announced that he was dropping sanctions on Syria. Now, I'm not thrilled that he met with the Syrian leader, this guy al-Shara, who people call al-Julani.
We're going to get to that too.
Yeah, but think about who's investing in Syria. It's not Syrians, it's the Saudis, it's the Emiratis. So now they can do that, and they can make money in Syria without being subject to sanctions. So they're happy. Whether it's a good move or not for Syria, I don't know. Syria is so weak right now, maybe it doesn't matter. But he's doing all of these things to get people involved. And I've written about this before, but if you look at how Trump proceeds with strategy, whether it's international relations or domestic politics, people know him as a very tough guy, very harsh. He flames people on Twitter or X or Truth Social. He retaliates in dramatic fashion. So if China puts a tariff on the U.S., he responds with a 1 billion% tariff. People know that Donald Trump. But what they miss is that he often starts out with an effort to accommodate, an effort to build bridges. He pays it forward. He does something for you first, and then he lets you react. And right. I think he's doing that with the Arab world, with the Muslim world. He is saying to them, I've heard your concerns. Here, I'm giving you sanctions relief in Syria. I'm visiting all these important Arab countries before I set foot in Israel in my second presidency. And I'm generating all this goodwill so that when I move forward from here and I talk to the Israelis and I start getting tough with the Iranians, you're on my side. And I think we saw a hint of that when Trump made one last speech before leaving Saudi Arabia and going to Qatar. He gave a speech to the Gulf Coordination Council, the GCC, And he said that there would be no nuclear deal with Iran if the Iranians didn't also commit to stop terrorism and to stop supporting what he called bloody proxy wars outside of their borders, which is exactly right. Those are the two commitments Netanyahu explicitly wanted from Obama in the first Iran deal. That's why Netanyahu came to Congress, made that big speech in front of that special joint session, and 52 Democrats boycotted. But Netanyahu said, if you want to deal with Iran, they've got to stop terrorism, they've got to stop starting wars, and they've got to stop trying to destroy my country. And Trump basically said that to the Arab world. He hadn't said that before in this round of negotiations. So I think what he's doing is he's generating goodwill and consensus around American leadership in the Middle East. He's getting all the big players in the Arab world on board. And then he's marching with a united front toward Iran and saying, we want to do this deal with you, but here are the conditions. They're pretty basic. Stop trying to kill people outside Iran. How hard is that? Just stop doing that. And I'm beginning to think this trip might end up being a massive success. We have to wait and see. But it does seem promising to me now. So I've changed my view over the course of the week.
Okay, I want to get into a bunch of specifics here, and let's start with the jet, because Qatar giving us a jet, and I guess so that Trump can refurbish it and use it as he pleases while Boeing completes work on the new Air Force One, which is taking forever. It's not a great look to Qatar as a state sponsor of terror, and traditionally has not been a ally or a friend, but it feels like Trump trying to normalize in the region is a big deal. It also feels like it's some bait for people to overreact to it, which Trump likes to do that. He likes to do things that people inevitably overreact to, and it feels like that could be another example of this. It's one of these things where in a vacuum, I guess I wish he didn't do it, but it's like I honestly don't care that much, and that's sort of where I'm at, but where are you at?
Let me tell you about this plane. First of all, I want to just correct something I said. It's the Gulf Cooperation Council, not coordination. So that's the GCC. But Qatar is a member of the GCC. More than that, Qatar is also designated officially by the United States as a major non-NATO ally. There are very few countries that fall into that category. And we also have a massive military base there. It's the headquarters of Central Command, CENTCOM. So this idea that we're going to normalize Qatar by taking this one plane, we have so normalized them. We have massive problems with them. Yes, they funded the Muslim Brotherhood. Yes, they are exporting extremism everywhere. Yes, they control Al Jazeera, which is a pro-terror news network that causes upheaval in Arab countries, never mind in Israel. And they are big headaches. I argued that we should not have our military base there. It came up for renewal under Biden, and Biden renewed it, and I thought that was terrible. At the time he renewed it, they were giving free hotel rooms to the leadership of Hamas, all of whom are billionaires. So I think they're terrible, but we're well beyond the point of normalizing them. We have a relationship with them because many presidents ago, we decided to work with them because, believe it or not, some time ago, they were seen as a liberalizing, opening influence in the Persian Gulf, in the Arabian Peninsula. They were seen as one of the more quote-unquote progressive or liberal states, and the smaller nations around the Gulf were seen as more open to trade and investment and even exchange and business with Israel. Bahrain, for example, another one of the small Gulf states, had a Jewish ambassador to the United States, and I even think they had some kind of outreach to the Olympics, or I can't remember what contest it was. They had someone who was Jewish representing Bahrain. I mean, these small little Gulf states were seen as the vanguard of a new Middle East. So Qatar was seen in that way. They are double players. They play that game, and then they also play the Muslim Brotherhood funding extremism game. So they are a problem, but with some people in the Middle East that we don't really like, and that's the reality we're facing. This jet, it bothers me for a different reason. I mean, I'm sure it bothers you for this reason as well. We haven't mentioned it, but why would the United States ever rely for its most important aircraft, its flagship aircraft, on any other country? I don't care whether it's a friend or a foe. Like, why are we importing the plane that the president will ride around in? Because it conveys the idea that the president's owned by some other country. So I think it's a problem for that reason. But I don't think it's a problem for the reason that Democrats have cooked up. They're all going around saying that Qatar gave some kind of personal gift to the president. And
Yeah.
I'm seeing these endless pontifications on X about how, well, even if it does go to the Defense Department, he's saying it'll go to his presidential library, so they're going to have to install all this security, then they're going to have to uninstall it for his library or for his personal use or whatever. And there's this emoluments clause in the Constitution and blah, blah, blah. And I care a lot about following the Constitution, but the Constitution has ways to do this. Congress can approve the gift. It's not a problem legally or constitutionally if you go, even if it were a personal gift to the president. So this is all drama. It's more outrage. And I told someone who was trying to argue with me about it privately, I said, I just can't get outraged about the daily hoopla anymore. Like this drama the media wants us to have every day. I can't go there. Like, I mean, what's the big picture, right? The big picture is the Qataris offered him a gift and he accepted it in principle because he's developing ties in the region and he's trying to get people to talk to one another. And that's the big picture. Don't bother me about this petty stuff about whether he got a gift that violates the emoluments clause.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also the emoluments clause. I brought this up on yesterday's show about how they've been fantasizing about this from the day he took the oath of office in 2017. They wanted this.
Before Larry Tribe was writing essays before he took the oath of office.
You got it right. He's the guy. He's been the one pushing it.
Yeah. So just to round out the point, they would say the same thing whether he received a golf ball or an airplane. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, they would try to impeach him over this, So don't take any mints off the pillow at the hotel.
Good. So we're building towards where I want to go, which is the big picture with all this. But I got a couple of quick, smaller picture ones. So him, I guess, taking off sanctions on Syria, again, one of the worst countries in the world overall. They have a terrorist leader now, essentially, and Trump's meeting with them. I know we're thinking big picture here. There's something going on, but you haven't fully understood what he's attempting to do with this, because obviously Trump thinks he's getting something in return. What is it that he thinks he's getting?
Okay, so as I said earlier, I think he's getting the goodwill of the other Arab states who want to make money in Syria. Syria is a very interesting country. It has a fascinating history. It had, until ISIS got involved, some of the most spectacular archaeological ruins in all of civilization. We're talking about not just Muslim sites, but Roman, Greek sites, Assyrian Empire. We're talking all of civilization in the early millennia moved through Syria. It's at the heart of the Fertile Crescent. Damascus is one of the world's oldest cities, may even be the oldest city, I don't know. But we're talking about biblical sites, archaeological evidence of the Bible. I mean, there's so much in Syria. It's a fascinating country. And it has business people, manufacturing. It doesn't have a huge economy, but many years ago, I actually met people who had textile factories in Syria, Arab Muslim people who wanted to export textiles to the rest of the world, and they were just stuck with this horrible regime. But you have an entrepreneurial class there, even after the civil war and the hundreds of thousands of people that were murdered by the regime. What's going on in Syria? So this guy who calls himself al-Jilani is not his real name. He took that name to refer to the Golan Heights in Israel. That's a jihadi name. I don't like referring to him as Jilani because that's reinforcing his ideological goal, or at least his former ideological goal, of destroying Israel and taking the Golan Heights back to Syria. The Golan Heights are never going back to Syria because the Syrian military used them to shell Israel from the high ground, the same way Hezbollah used the high ground of Lebanon to shell Israel. Israel took it over in a defensive war. It's never giving it back. And that's just off the table. But the jihadi world thinks it's not off the table. I don't want to call him Jilani. His name is al-Shara. So al-Shara is this guy who used to be on the U.S. most wanted list, $10 million bounty on his head because he was involved in Al-Qaeda and ISIS, all kinds of stuff. And he was one of the leaders of the rebellion of Sunni Muslims that eventually overthrew the Alawite regime of Syria and the Assad family that had ruled there for decades. Not a good guy. I don't believe he's changed. I believe he's a jihadi. I believe that he cannot be trusted. And so when President Trump says what a great guy this Shara guy is, I'm sure he's impressive in person because he's a soldier and he is a good-looking guy, as the president pointed out. But I don't think he's anyone we can trust for any reason at all. However, a few things have happened. Number one, Israel destroyed what was left of the Syrian military, the Syrian weapons stockpiles. Once the regime fell, Israel ran airstrikes and commando raids into Syria for weeks, destroying everything that was left. Israel has also taken Mount Hermon, which is the highest peak in the region. Israel used to only have part of that mountain, and the Syrians had the peak. Israel now has the peak. It's not giving that up. It's going to dominate the Syrian airspace. It's going to be able to watch everything that happens in Syria from up there. So Syria is basically completely gone as a military power or as a security threat. The only threats are from local militias and intercommunal violence. That is a problem. We are seeing ethnic cleansing or various kinds of atrocities happening in Alawite communities as people take revenge against the community that was associated with the Syrian regime, rightly or wrongly. People are carrying out massacres against Christians and Druze people in southern Syria. And the Israelis are actually moving into that territory to protect some of those populations. So Israel is doing what it can to protect its own interests, and its own interests include protecting the Druze people. There are Druze Israelis as well who have said to their government, we want you to protect our cousins over in Syria. So Israel is doing that. But there's nothing al-Shura can do to stop them because he has no military other than the jihadis who waltzed into the collapsing capital of the Assad family. So I don't know that Syria is really a threat anymore. And the only other way in which they were a threat was because Iran was using them as a base. But Iran now has lost that. It's lost Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's lost its supply lines through Syria to Lebanon. Iran is in retreat. So I don't think Syria is the same threat it was, which makes al-Shura less dangerous. Not less menacing, not any less of a jihadi, but just unable to threaten us. And the only way he's going to survive in power is if he starts growing his economy. So he's got to be nice with the West. And in being nice with the West, he's also being nice with the rest of the Middle East because he needs Saudi investment. He wants Emirati investment, Qatari investment, and he's going to get it as long as the sanctions are off. And Trump has said, okay, the sanctions are off. That's why Trump got a standing ovation from a room full of businessmen in the Middle East. So I don't like it, but at the same time, if what he got in response, which apparently was some kind of commitment to normalize ties with Israel maybe down the road and not to attack neighbors and that sort of thing,
right?
Maybe it's worth it. And I don't think the Israelis and the Syrians are going to be great friends anytime soon.
Yeah.
But let me just round out this thought by mentioning a friend of mine, Jake Turks. He used to be the White House correspondent for an Orthodox Jewish magazine. He was very visible in the first Trump administration. He would always ask Trump questions about Jewish communities. But he doesn't just talk about Jewish issues. He talks about general issues as well. And a very visible guy, Hasidic Jew. He looks like a kind of stereotypical religious Jew. Normally he wears a black coat, black hat. He's got the side curls, the beard, the whole deal. And he went to Damascus with a group of Jewish people who went to see this old Jewish site that had apparently been vandalized, and they were going to try to restore it. And he just posted a huge essay about being a Jewish person in Damascus. And I don't think it's easy to be a Jew in Damascus, but he told everybody in this essay that he felt fine. He didn't feel threatened. He didn't advertise the fact that he was Jewish, and he kind of wore a hat instead of his usual sort of Jewish garb. I mean, it was sort of a cap instead of the usual black hat or whatever. But if people asked him, he said he was Jewish, and nothing happened to him. He said people were quite friendly. Damascus felt safe after years of civil war. He said the periphery around Damascus is not safe, but basically in the capital city, things felt fine. And I think that's ultimately the test. Can you go there as a Jewish person or as someone who's not obviously from the area and still feel safe, or at least feel like things are going to be fine? And he said so. And I trust him because he's quite honest, and he would have said if something had gone wrong. He had no financial interest in reporting otherwise. So I think that Syria could be okay. And it's not going to quite be as dramatic a relationship, as close a relationship as Tel Aviv and Dubai, where I joked before the peace deal really came together that it was going to be like flying from Vegas to LA, almost like a bus service going back and forth, without the drink tickets on the plane. But, it's going to be very interesting to see if Damascus and Tel Aviv can develop trade relations, because once you have that corridor going, there's nothing that can stop the massive growth that would result.
But what's so appealing about doing business in Syria? Like, what is because it's the civil war there is just so intense, unpredictable. It seems like such a headache to sort it out. So I just feel like that, but I get to say this from my perch in America where everything's comfortable, but what is the incentive there, Joel?
So first of all, Syria is one of the best watered countries in the Middle East. It has rainfall, it has water resources. So there are all kinds of agricultural businesses you can open in Syria.
Sure.
And this is of huge interest to the Arab world, right? I mean, right now, Saudi Arabia gets alfalfa for horses. I'm not joking, by the way. This is true. The Saudis buy their alfalfa from California because you can't get it in the Middle East, at least not as good. I don't know. But if you can turn Syria's water resources into irrigated fields that can raise crops, then you can create an entirely new cash crop in Syria. So there's the agricultural side. And then, as I said, there is some industrial capacity in Syria. It used to be a fairly entrepreneurial society before the civil war. And there are lots of Syrians all over the world who left many years before the civil war, if they could, and who would come back and do trade. It's the crossroads of the Middle East. Damascus is still really central to commerce in the Middle East. It's a land bridge, basically, between the Gulf and the Levant, between Iraq and Jordan on the one hand, and then Lebanon and even Turkey on the other, and maybe Israel. So it's really at the crossroads, and it could be a great place to invest if it's safe to do so.
Really fascinating. Thank you for that background, Joel. So a couple other points here that I think are worth making. There's two sort of unspoken entities that loom over everything here that are not present or not at the forefront. Israel. Trump's not meeting with Israel on this trip. I feel like this is calculated and it's designed to not distract from the progress he's trying to make with Arab states. But also, Trump has traditionally been pretty icy towards Netanyahu for the last 5 years or so. So that could be an issue. And the other one's Iran, where obviously we would like to dismantle Iran's nuclear capabilities without necessarily starting a hot war to do it. Those are both looming large, but neither of them are being addressed openly. Give me your thoughts.
Well, I don't think that Trump is particularly frosty toward Netanyahu. I think two things are happening. Firstly, Trump is making it very clear that while the United States and Israel have many common interests, our interests diverge at some point. And the United States is going to place its own interests first. That is a very good thing to know as an American. It also makes support for Israel stronger in the United States because the U.S. is not seen as being manipulated by Israel. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a powerful narrative on the right that has made that claim, and Trump is making it very clear that's not how things work. So I think that actually makes Americans more comfortable supporting Israel because it's done from a position of independence and sovereignty. If you know people who are in bad relationships that are codependent, those couples are never happy. But if you know relationships where people have their own lives, even though they spend a lot of their time together, they each do their own thing, they're a lot happier. It feels a lot healthier. Secondly, I think Trump is saying to Netanyahu, we know that you can defend yourselves. We know that if we gave you the green light, you could go in and take out Iran's nuclear facilities pretty easily. You've already eliminated their air defenses. There's no more air defense. Iran's defenseless. But we want to do things our way. Give us a chance to do things our way. And at first, I was worried about this because I thought, well, this sounds exactly like what Biden was trying to do, which is to go around and talk to people. But now that this Middle East trip has unfolded, it really does look more like Trump's way, and of course I should have known this because this is how he does things everywhere, but Trump's way is to develop economic ties. And no, it's not just an economic trip. It is very much about other issues as well. But Trump is saying we want to be leaders, the leaders in the region, but we're going to do it not because our military is powerful, although that's part of it. We're going to do it because we are going to create opportunities for everyone to make money. And let us try that first. Trump, I think, understands that it might fail because the Iranian regime, its model of making money has been to export terrorism. I mean, the group running Iran and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the sort of elite military unit that dominates Iranian politics, they've basically been running this terrorist kleptocracy for the last 40 years, 50 years almost. And they have been relying on these external wars to siphon resources from the state and from the oil industry and to make themselves wealthy. And they might be so wedded to that model that they can't survive the broader investment picture that Trump is painting. So if they can't, then Trump will say to the Israelis, all right, just put these guys out of their misery. I don't think it's going to be an Iraq-style war. It's not going to involve major movements of troops or occupations or anything like that. Iran's too big. It has too many people. Can't be done. And the Iranian people are very proud. They have a civilization. They're also very pro-American. I mean, it might just take a push or two against the regime, and the people of Iran might just rise up and get rid of the regime themselves. But yeah. I think that what Trump is doing is saying, we are the leading power in the region, and we're going to lead. Let us lead our way. You want to do it your way? We'll give you that chance when it's time. But I think all of this is healthy, and that's why the Israelis and the Americans are telling Breitbart News, like that spectacular interview with Steve Witkoff and Matt Boyle. Everyone's telling us that there is no breakdown in relations. I think there are some difficult conversations happening as they try to work out how to move forward together, but there isn't a breakdown in trust. And I no longer think that Trump is throwing Netanyahu under the bus. It looked like he might have been, but now that we see what he's doing, I think it's clear that what's happening here is a process, and it's going to take some time before we see whether it works or not. It won't go on forever. I mean, I would give Trump till the end of the year. If we don't see significant progress on Iran, I think the Israelis are going to go ahead and do what they do.
Really interesting. Joel, I appreciate all the time you're putting into all these. You know, it's so much about the region, and it's really nice to translate it back to this audience. I had another half dozen topics I wanted to get to with you. I have to have you back soon, talk about South Africa and the Afrikaner refugees. But I feel like we've gone sufficiently long for today, so we'll have to do that soon. But I appreciate you joining me. Nice stuff.
Thank you.
The media is broken. For decades, big cable and legacy media have filtered information to hide the truth. But thanks to podcasts and new media like this show, the truth can break through, providing voices and views the legacy outlets block from the air. But big cable still has one major way to control information, and that's access. They do this by limiting access to something called spectrum, the invisible airwaves that power affordable wireless internet, and by forcing you into their bundles, keeping independent media out of reach. Trump and Republicans in Congress have a chance to do something big here by making more spectrum available and breaking big cable's stranglehold on information. So there's a couple things you could do to find out more. You can go to endthecableopoly.org. That's endthecableopoly.org for more information about how to make more spectrum available. And if you're convinced, you should call your senators and your members of Congress and say, hey, why don't you work with President Trump and try to make more spectrum available? So endthecableopoly.org to find more. All right, John Carney's here with me, our economic and finance editor at Breitbart News. He also writes the invaluable Breitbart Business Digest. It's so terrific. I read it every day, and I occasionally have to write it, but that's a loss for the audience when that happens. John, let's talk about the inflation numbers that came out yesterday. We did a deep dive on this in our Breitbart Confidential show on Fight Club that people can check out if they want. But I didn't get a lot of detail to my audience, and I thought it'd be a nice opportunity to have you to discuss it because we have no inflation for the last 2 months, which is potentially just massive news for this country. But I want you to give us the data and what it could mean.
Yeah, so we had negative inflation in March, meaning prices actually fell 0.1%. The April number came in 0.2%, an increase. That's a pretty small increase. The year-over-year number is 2.3%, so prices are up just 2.3% from a year ago. That's the lowest since February of 2021. So in other words, we haven't been this low more or less since the last time Donald Trump was president. We haven't had this little inflation. And when you look deeper into the numbers, they're even better than it looks there. So goods inflation, like we go through it and you see food down, particularly groceries. When you look at gasoline, prices are down. When you're looking through a whole variety of travel costs are down. It's a report that really should make Americans, and an indicator that Americans probably feel better about a lot of things. I mean, eggs, right? Everybody focuses on eggs all the time. Yeah. That became a big political football. Eggs are down. The price of a dozen eggs are down 18%. The broader egg category, I mean, it's amazing how much detail the government does on some of this stuff, but the broader egg category, which includes eggs not bought by the dozen, is down 12.7%. I think the history shows that the drop in egg prices, the 12.7%, is the largest drop since 1984. So, this is a really big decrease. It shows, I mean, a big part of this was we had killed a lot of chickens because we had an avian flu breakout. Now we're bringing chickens into the farm, so we got a decrease there. But I think the like bigger message here was that people were scared to death of tariffs. We were told that tariffs were going to cause inflation. It was going to be really bad. Toy prices were going to go up. Everything was supposed to go up. And you look through this report, and it really isn't there. So much so that a lot of the people who were predicting that inflation would be higher have had to backtrack and start to say things like, well, it's going to come. It just hasn't come yet. Alex, you and I both, lived through and all of your audience has as well, lived through the first Trump administration. That was the mantra every time. I followed the inflation reports month after month after month. And whenever there was an inflation showing up in it, everybody said, oh, it's going to come someday. And it never came. It only got inflation when Biden took office and spent like a crazy person. And that's really what caused inflation. The Trump tariffs never did. And I think it's possible we see a repeat of that.
Yeah, this is pretty remarkable because, John, we were at the cutting edge of course, we branded it Bidenflation, which I still see pop up quite a bit, which is nice. But we were walking through the levels of deficit spending that was being done. In particular, things like the American Recovery Act, we were already recovering, was going to be wildly inflationary. I have to admit, the left promising us that tariffs were going to create inflation, I thought it might create a little bit, but right now we're not really seeing any because inflation is flat overall, and a lot of the prices that are going up still are not necessarily related to the tariffs. I'm actually sort of. It just proves the media is wrong about everything, but it is pretty wild that the prices aren't going up at all, considering the climate we're in.
Yeah, and actually, if not for a couple items that are, I mean, they seriously impact people, but they have nothing to do with trade. So like auto insurance was up by a good amount. That's not a really trade-related issue. Non-drug medical, so medical services costs were up. Again, not a trade issue at all. There were some increases, like there was like bedroom furniture increased, but rugs decreased. There was some appliances went up a little bit, but cars went down. That's not inflation. And it's really hard to argue that tariffs caused it because inflation, remember, isn't just some things going up in price. It's when everything more or less goes up in price all at once. A normal economy has prices that go up in some things and down in other things. Normally, you can't get a general price rise unless you're injecting a lot more money into the economy through both Fed accommodation and deficit spending from the fiscal side. So I'm not surprised that we didn't see a big inflationary surge here. But I mean, frankly, I'm very relieved that the numbers came in so good. Again, Wall Street was expecting a 0.3%. We got better than that. They thought we'd have 2.4% year over year. We got 2.3%. So it's better than expected. And this is, by the way, the third month in a row in which inflation has come in under what was expected. To put it differently, every month that Trump has been president, inflation has come in lower than what the official Wall Street forecasts were supposed to.
Well, why do you think that is? You think the forecasts are cooked? Because you look at the media announced that egg prices were going to be a problem. They've not been a problem. Everything was going to be inflated. We were all going to run out of money. And none of that's true. So I'm kind of fine that they say this stuff because maybe that's what prompts Rosie O'Donnell to leave the country and Ellen DeGeneres to leave the country. And like that's great. I mean, they can all get out as far as I'm concerned. So It's not without its silver linings, but
if Rosie decides to be French, right? Like it'll
yeah.
be.
No, she's in Ireland now. She's gone.
I don't know. I like Ireland. I don't wish Rosie O'Donnell.
Oh, you don't want her in Ireland because you're right. Because you've got some Irish background.
Yeah, I got Irish relatives, and I'd like to visit Irish friends. I don't, but
it's true. It's not a good endorsement for Ireland when Rosie's there and she's just saying, wow, this place is amazing, so much better than America. I just love the pace of it here. Like, all right, it doesn't say much.
Maybe Rosie's arrival will prompt them to rethink their immigration policies there. They'll say, okay, we've gone too far. We let Rosie O'Donnell in. It's time to, start to crack down on the borders a little bit here. I think you asked why Wall Street keeps getting it wrong. I don't think it's cooked in a partisan way. I just don't think that we have had a lot of experience raising tariffs for, 100 years almost, right? Like tariffs have generally been coming down since World War II. So when the analysts are trying to think, like they do the math, they run their models and they say, oh, well, we think this will increase consumer prices by X. They don't have a lot of history to go on. There's not, that they can't look at it and say, oh, the last time we did this happened. When we cut taxes, we have a pretty good history, right? Like with a lot of things, you can model it pretty well. We don't have a good history in the modern American economy of what happens when you either put a 10% tariff on everything or you do the reciprocal tariffs. We can make guesses. And Wall Street really and economists don't really have a good, historical model to test their theoretical models against.
Sure. All right. So some of the things that I'm happiest about, I did bring this up yesterday, so I don't need to dwell too much, but the kidflation that you reported on, kidflation going, this is just great news for families. I joke about it because I've got many kids, a ridiculous amount, but this is overall really good for families. This does trickle down in the rest of the economy when we can keep prices for kid stuff under control.
And bicycles are down, ice cream is down, hot dogs are down, breakfast cereal is down.
How can bicycles be down? I feel like bicycles have to go through China, right?
Yeah, well, so the last time, actually, bicycles were one of the few things that went up in price during the Trump administration. Like when I tracked, thousands of products to watch what might be affected by tariffs.
Yeah.
Bicycles arguably were one of the things, but we actually do make high quality bicycles. A lot of them are made in America. If you buy, I don't want to name the brands, but a lot of high quality bicycles are actually manufactured in the United States. Not all of them come from China. Yes, there are substantial ones that come from China, but I think also that one of the things that we're seeing both probably in this report and we'll see it in future reports is that companies saw the tariffs coming. They knew. I mean, when Donald Trump won the election, do you think anybody was like, oh, wow, I had no idea he was going to put tariffs on China? Of course they knew that was going to happen. Maybe they didn't think that before November. But once he won, you were on notice that you knew tariffs were coming, at least on China. And so if you're a smart business, if you're Walmart, right, do you think Walmart sat around and were like, I don't know what's going to happen with China? No, they knew tariffs were coming, and so they probably bought a lot of bicycles, right? There's probably warehouses full of some of this stuff, so that helps hold down the price, which is great. It means that people won't be squeezed. The other thing that happens is that companies, especially ones with major market power, Walmart, Target, Best Buy, Costco, these companies are major purchasers from manufacturers of items. When the tariff comes in, they say to their partners, hey guys, we don't want to raise the price on our customer, so we need you to lower the price so that the tariff is lower. So, and they have the market power to do that. So I think that's another thing that we'll see happening. And one reason why we won't see as much pass through as people, as the establishment economists expect.
Right. Okay. So this bodes well. So is there anything that you're cautious about that we shouldn't get too excited about?
Look, I always say, don't make too big of a deal out of 1 month of data because things can change. So I do expect there will be in the future some price pressure on some things that will show up in the tariffs. I think we will see things, I mean, television prices went down. We don't buy a lot of televisions actually from China, but we are tariffing many countries. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Television prices dropped. I think we'll see some.
But television prices are always coming down. I just feel like
Yeah.
it's the one thing. See, it's kind of sad to me because I remember one of the first times I felt like a real man was when I could buy a nice TV set up. When I got my job at Breitbart, I got a 42-inch. I got with the TV stand, a Blu-ray, and that was like a big deal.
I didn't own a television basically till I got married because I just wasn't home enough. I didn't. I worked a lot and I socialized a lot. Didn't own a television. Finally bought one, and I thought they were going to be much more expensive than they were. It was amazing to me when I also thought they'd be heavier. I remember I was in one of these big stores and I asked the clerk, like, it's like this giant thing, and I was like, "How am I going to get that home?" And he was like, "Oh, you can carry this." I was like, "Really?" And it was light. I was a bit anyway.
Yeah, no, that is funny. That there was a moment in time where you thought if you need to buy a TV, you need to get like a U-Haul or find a buddy with a truck. Yeah, no, those days aren't here. But I want to talk about something that is heavy, which is cars. So cars, new cars not up, used cars not up. Another one where I don't think I fully. I'm always optimistic about Trump's chess moves, and I think that he does not actually shoot from the hip on a lot of stuff. I think that maybe he doesn't know the end game when he starts making moves, but I don't feel like he does things that are he feels like there's a chance that they're really going to blow up in his face. But cars, it's just we're not seeing the massive car inflation that you would think would immediately happen with tariffs.
Which is what they told us would happen, right? Prices of cars are going to go up right away. Remember, cars are actually super interesting because they are one of the most negotiable prices in anything you buy, right? Like you go into a store, you don't bargain over a gallon of milk. You don't really even bargain very much over like a couch, right? You just pay whatever they want. Car prices are actually expected to be negotiated. That you go in and there's an official manufacturer's recommended price or whatever, but nobody pays that. Everybody says, well, I want this car and I want these features in it. And, you ask for this and I'll say this. It's almost part of some people pride themselves on being really good at, negotiating with car dealers. I'm not one of those people. Again, I lived in New York City. I didn't own cars for a while. So, I don't think I'm an expert car negotiator, but what that means is that it's much harder to just pass on the costs. It's also a fiercely competitive business. You drive down this whatever street is in your town that has car dealerships.
Yeah,
it probably has 5 right in a row. So that creates a price constraint for them. If one guy's like, "Oh, well, my cost went up, I better raise my price," the guy next door puts up a big flag that says, "We're having a massive Memorial Day sale. Come in now, buy a car." So we didn't see that big pass through on tariffs for cars. I don't think we really will. The other thing I'll say is when we do see prices go up, and prices for some things probably will go up. I don't want to set an unrealistic expectation, but I think it won't be inflationary. I think we'll see prices on other things come down to pay for the higher prices on some things. That Americans have a pot of income and a pot of money that they make. Just because tariffs are there doesn't give them more money to spend. And so therefore, it's really hard to get a general rise in the price level if you don't have a rise in people's spending power. So I don't think it's going to happen.
All right, so we got a bunch of downstream items to cover, and then I want to switch gears and talk about a couple other finance stuff that's related. But the first one is the Fed. So Trump is obviously going to want the Fed to lower rates. What do you think?
So he's out there already. He reacted with a little bit of a delay for Trump. Usually he's on it right away, but he was speaking in the Middle East and having meetings. But he did say, what's wrong with too late, Powell? That's the nickname he's given Jerome Powell. Why isn't he cutting rates? He points out that central banks around the world are cutting rates, and urged them to cut. He was actually not that mean in this Truth Social post. He may, think he realizes that eventually the Fed is going to cut. So they're just not going to do it right away. They didn't do it at this meeting that they just had. Probably not going to do it at the next meeting. Frankly, the way the Fed looks at it is they're worried that there may be inflation. They're actually not worried about actual inflation coming about because of the tariffs. They more or less recognize that it's going to be a one-time price increase on some things. So a relative shift in prices. Even if the price level in general moved up, it's not going to be an ongoing thing. What they're worried about is the price level goes up and then expectations of inflation go up. And the Fed has this theory that's relatively widely accepted among economists, although I'm not sure it's correct, that expectations actually drive inflation. That if people expect a lot of inflation, then you get a lot of inflation. And so they're worried that the tariffs could cause prices to move up and that could cause people to expect more inflation.
Okay, cool. So, all right. So what about China? So China is one thing that the media just does not take into account, that us making aggressive maneuvering against China will hurt China, and they don't really want that as well. So let's talk about any potential China deal that could come together and how China is feeling about this stuff overall.
Yeah, so China, I think, is feeling a lot of pain. When those tariffs were up at 145%, the orders just stopped coming in. People were scrambling to find other places to buy things. China was scrambling to find other customers around the world. All right, if we can't sell to the US, where can we sell? And the answer is nowhere. There's nobody else willing to take the kind of surplus from China that we've been taking. And so China found itself in a really hard spot. They recently abolished a whole bunch of economic statistics, so you can't even tell what's going on. That probably had something to do with the trade tensions. The other problem is China is just a very tyrannical country, and it's really hard for them to get honest reporting at the local level because people tend, if you're a government official in a province in China and you think you're supposed to report your unemployment rate is, 5%, you're scared to death if it goes up to 7% that you're going to be disappeared. So you just report what's expected. And that makes it really hard for the Chinese government to actually get honest statistics because everybody's afraid to tell them, it's like telling Darth Vader that, the Death Star is a risky operation, right? It's just going to choke you out with this, so your lack of faith disturbs me, right? It's not a good plan.
Yeah.
So nobody tells Darth Vader the truth. Nobody tells Xi Jinping the truth. And so China's economy is in a lot of trouble. They desperately want a deal. The problem is, China's a tough country. They look at what they did in COVID, like locked people in apartment blocks, right? Like people weren't allowed out on the street. They got through that. And I think they can get through Donald Trump. And so the negotiations that are going to happen are going to be pretty tough because China's probably going to want to sound really nice and stretch out negotiations with low tariffs for as long as possible without actually committing to doing anything. And even if they commit, there's a question of whether they actually do it. It goes back, it's almost like an arms negotiation treaty with the Soviets back in the Cold War era. Reagan always said, like, trust but verify.
Right.
And that's what we need to do. And we're going to have to set up mechanisms probably that automatically raise tariffs if we think China is not living up to whatever they agree to here.
One thing that's interesting is that I want to talk about oil and gas prices because I think Trump sees a lot of the key to the economy is making sure we're getting as much energy out of the ground as possible. I'm out in California where it does feel like gas prices are going up again. I felt like they were ticking down for a second and then they're going up. There's a lot of talk of certain refineries that not meeting some sort of regulations that Newsom's put into place, and we could lose certain refineries by the end of this year and then more again next year. I mean, I don't see how a guy could run for president with this type of policy. And when people are just kind of souring on the electric cars to some degree, especially with their terrible resale value, Tesla makes a lot of them and liberals don't like Tesla anymore. Are you up on this stuff, John?
Yeah, we need a lot more refining capacity in the U.S. We can increase drill baby drill is fine and it's a good idea, but we also need refine baby refine. If we don't increase the refining capacity, you can pull all the oil out of the ground that you want, but if you're not refining it, it's not going to help you actually produce energy that people can use. One problem we've had with that is that for a long time, the U.S. government was more or less telling people that we were going to get off fossil fuels eventually, right? That carbon emissions were no good, that we were going to have to move away from this. And if you know that, do you invest $1 billion in refining capacity? No. So we're underinvested in refining capacity. We need more of it. The Trump administration, I think, is doing a good job of making it clear that we are not going down that path. But it's hard because, frankly, one political party, the Democrats, are absolutely still dedicated to stopping us from expanding pipelines, refining capacity. They would like to, they hate offshore drilling. They don't want us to drill in Alaska. They don't want us to frack. So they are trying to stop the expansion of energy. And if you're an investor in this stuff, you have to be worried, right? Like, yes, Trump can have the right policies, but you don't know what's going to happen in 2028 or 2032 or 2036. You have to have a long time span for these things. And so the danger of having a Green New Deal is perpetually out there. We probably need Congress actually to step in and pass some laws to make it clear that we are not going to ban fossil fuels or internal combustion engines. And they could do, and Congress has the power actually to crack down on states doing this too, because it's obviously interstate commerce, refining capacity. So Congress they already do regulate energy production and refining. They could stop states from doing the crazy things that Newsom's doing. As you said, the Democrats hope I do think, I'm very cynical about this. I think the Democrats hope to keep us from having more energy so that gas prices go up so that they can then say, one, they can attack Donald Trump over it. Number two, they could say alternative energy is cheap compared to oil or coal or natural gas. But that's only because they kept us from producing enough of it.
Okay, let me, next topic that I got for you is the drug prices. Trump has executive order that he wants to bring down drug prices, have a most favored nation policy where we essentially get the lowest prices in the world. That sounds kind of pie in the sky. We got to be cautious here because we lead the world in biotech innovation, and that is a good thing. I know a lot of people in the audience are just blanket going to be negative, big pharma. But there's a distinction here. The salespeople at big pharma are too aggressive. I agree with that. The COVID shot was a disgrace, the way that was handled, even though the technology was actually not as bad as, X, the Everything app would have you believe. But the main thing is that certainly we're overpaying for drug prices, but we want to fix this in a way where we are also not destroying a industry that literally saves lives also. So do you have a sense on how we do this? And what do you think of Trump's initial announcement?
I think actually the more I've read about the announcement, the more I like it.
Yeah, I did just, by the way, I offered caveats, but I overall was very positive when I announced it at the top of the show, and that stands. But continue with your take, John.
So over the past 50 years, really, a system has developed where the U.S. has paid far more than the rest of the world for drugs. And it's not because we get the better drugs or we get more of them or we're consuming more of them. None of that is the reason why we pay so much. It's really because the rest of the world is a free rider on the US funding development. One analogy to think of is the way Europe underfunded its own defense. So it could fund its own social welfare state while the US was basically paying to keep the Soviets and then the Russians at bay for decades. And we've said no more, right? We are going to make you, we had to play a little game of chicken with them, say, we want you to pay more. Yes, so we're going to try to force you into doing this. You're going to, be very upset. We understand that. You're going to say we're putting the global order at risk. We're doing that with drugs now too. Europe in particular has been underpaying for the drugs they get. Trump's order very likely will force U.S. prices down and European prices up. They will have to bear more of the burden that they have been avoiding. I think that's a very good thing. We're not going to be the patsies on trade. We're not going to be the patsies on defense, and we're not going to be the patsies on drugs anymore. It's not, that era has come to an end. That's what Donald Trump is saying. And I don't think it hurts innovation as much as some people would have you think, because as I said, I think Europe will have to step up and pay a little more. I think it actually could lead to a little more competition. Um, it might even lead to, frankly, more companies deciding that they can get into the space. Right now, it's so profitable if you're a big drug company that a lot of other companies, even when they're startup drug companies, their game plan is really to sell to one of the big ones. So I think we could get more, and which is anti-competitive eventually. So I think we could get more competition. It could end up being very good for innovation. I also think that there's and I think Donald Trump is very, very, very well aware of this. There is a trade angle to this, which is to say, when we pay 4 times as much for medicine as our European or Asian competitors, that means that labor costs in the US are much more expensive because a lot of the medical care in the United States is actually paid, at least in part, through employers. So when we're paying 4 times as much for drugs, that makes our industry less competitive with Europe. So by rebalancing it, we're actually saying, more or less saying, like, look, you guys have a protectionist scheme when it comes to drug pricing. We are going to countervail that with
Yeah.
our one thing. And I think that's good. So I would urge everybody to look at this as a intervention to rebalance trade as well as, make drugs less expensive for the
I
US.
love that so much. It's such a great way of putting it. And that's always sort of the deal stuff that Trump's thinking of. He's not just thinking about the drugs.
Yeah.
He's thinking about just the general principles about trade. 2 more quick ones. One, this first one, John, I know we could do a long one on this. We probably will, but we're starting to get a taste of what the big, beautiful bill looks like. It looks like there's going to be not enough cuts in it. It looks like it's going to be very expensive. You've even got some Republicans talking about tax hikes. I guess my question is, do tax hikes ever work? Because I've moved on from a lot of the stuff I learned from National Review when I was reading it at the end of high school and in college. That's when I have not moved on from. I still don't think tax hikes ever work. So it's why are Republicans talking about it? It's what's your take?
Yeah, the thing that worries me, look, I'm enough of a populist that I don't mind if somebody wants to hike a tax on a super rich person. But my caveat is you don't get a lot of revenue from those kind of tax hikes at all because there just aren't that many rich people and they're really good at hiding their income. So it doesn't really work. The big problem is to get revenue from tax hikes, you really have to go lower down in the income. And where you really hit is small businesses. Small businesses, a guy who owns a auto mechanic shop. If you say, well, we're going to hike businesses on everybody who owns $1 million or earns $1 million or more, and you have a small business that is a LLC, it's a pass-through entity, it doesn't pay the corporate tax rate, it pays the personal tax rate. that actually ends up hurting small businesses. It inhibits growth. It has all sorts of negative consequences. So while I'm sympathetic to the idea, I worry that it's really going to fail in every way. It won't raise revenue, and to the extent it does, it's going to raise revenue from people that frankly we shouldn't be taking money from.
Interesting. All right. We're going to keep an eye on that as this one develops. And the last one, this is not related to the economy. You've just worked in the establishment media. I'm completely perplexed by this news cycle where the whole media is talking about whether or not people covered up Joe Biden's mental decline. I feel like I'm completely taking crazy pills. I don't understand why I feel like I'm the only person with this take that there was no cover up and that everyone knew and everyone knew that everyone else knew and that Joe Biden knew and Kamala knew. And Kamala was just such a horrible candidate. They did not want to pass the reins off to Kamala. And that's why they didn't do it, is because they had no succession plan. Joe Biden designed this by picking an idiot as his vice president. And that was what this is all about. And there's no cover up at all. And now the media congratulating themselves and announcing that there was a cover up. I'm a bit lost, John. I got to admit, I think I've mostly got it, but I just want your perspective as someone who knows these people even better than I do. I merely watch them like zoo animals as an experiment, but you actually work with them for years, the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, et cetera. What are they really thinking here?
Yeah, so I do think they think that they underreported how bad Joe Biden was, and they did. You're right that we knew, people knew, but there was an active attempt to suppress talking about it. That if you brought it up, you weren't allowed to go on the mainstream media cable shows, for instance, or the news shows and be like, I think Joe Biden is losing his mind. They would just throw you off the air. So there was a bit of a cover up. But I think you're right that, and by the way, Joe Biden agrees with you. He still says he would have won. He's like,
Yeah.
Well, I can't believe you guys wanted to run Kamala instead of me. I picked, and I think you're right. I think he picked her so that she could never be a threat to him.
Yeah.
That they would have to keep, nominating him at least for the second term because you'd have to be crazy to nominate Kamala. They were crazy. They did nominate Kamala. They forced Joe out. He says he would have won. We'll never know the answer to that. I don't think he's right, but we'll never know. She was a terrible candidate. I think the media is a little bit stunned by one thing I would be by the fact that they really got, not just on this, on inflation, on a zillion other things, that they really got overboard in supporting Joe Biden. They told us, ignore inflation. Those prices don't really matter. Joe Biden, they didn't quite say he's fine, but, he's good enough.
Yeah. That's it. That's where I was at. We can leave it there for now because I'm obsessed with this and it's not going to go away. But that was what I thought. Everyone understood he's not great, but Reagan has Alzheimer's in his second term and he's fine. I think it's one of these things. There's so few people who could literally be president at any given moment. I mean, even if you expand it out, maybe it's a dozen or 2 dozen, and they thought, he's the best guy we got. He's already there. We don't hate him.
You know what, Alex? One thing a note of caution. I think that they're gearing up to attack Trump on his age.
Yeah, I think so.
Going through all of this so that they can say, well, we're not going to make that mistake again. They're already doing that with inflation, by the way.
Yeah.
Nolte wrote a great piece about how, I think one of the networks, maybe NBC, just started a grocery price watch, right? So they didn't do this all through the Biden era when inflation was out of control. But now they're going to say, okay, we need to keep a close eye on prices because Donald Trump's president. So, all of this hand-wringing over Joe Biden by the media, I think is prep work for the character assassination attempt they're going to have when, if Donald Trump ever misspeaks, they're going to say, oh, he lost his mind, time to get him out of there. I mean, the thing he has in his favor is they hate J.D. Vance even more than Donald Trump. So, I don't think they're going to try to remove J.D. Vance. I mean, they're going to try to remove Trump because that would just elevate Vance.
Yeah, it's true. And it's interesting because if you look at 2028, you could look down and you could see that they'll figure out a way to hate him just as much, but it's looking like as of now, it could be a Vance versus Rubio situation, and Rubio is much more palatable to the Democrats. And so that's kind of interesting. They all supported him. So it'll be interesting to see how that could be an amazing 2028 if we don't get a coronation. And I'm rooting against coronation. I'm rooting for a primary. That's what I want.
I like primary.
You've heard it here first. I'm very consistent in this regard, and I'd tell JD that if he comes on the show, and hopefully he will one day soon. All right, John, I kept you too long because you're a very interesting guy, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Good luck on TV tonight, because John's always on TV. And that's it for today. Thanks to producer Misty and all of you in the audience, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.